Morning, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and the screen visible, video and audio, fine, right? You're able to see the
Yes, sir.
screen? Right, good. So today we have one more basic injury. So in the injury, what we have is today craniocerebral trauma or head injuries. Okay. So, okay. Craniocerebral trauma. Okay. So as we already know, the majority of these craniocerebral trauma in the Indian subcontinent, they are basically because of road traffic accidents. Majority of them they come to you that is with an head injuries because of road traffic accidents, or when there's an history of some fall, some assaults or injuries. Okay, or sometimes it can be doing in the workplace when they have fallen down, or doing the sports or at home. Okay, and majority of these serious injuries which occur, that is about 65% of these injuries which result in death, are usually from road traffic accidents, and these are usually because of under the influence of alcohol, and more commonly seen in the young males. Okay, so just remember, it's a road traffic accidents which are the most common cause of head injuries, followed by accidental falls, or there may be assaults or injuries or something at the workplace and all. Okay, or at the workplace and all, and majority of the deaths that are occurring in a patient with a head injury are because of road traffic accidents. Okay, so pathophysiology, basically what is going to happen is it can occur in two way. Okay, first, you remember that brain is very vulnerable to trauma because of consistency of well set jelly. So, so we have a skull or the cranium. We will go. Skull will include the cranium plus the mandible, right? Now the cranium is going to have the bony covering out of it, and there is going to be presence of the brain, and this brain is always filled up with a fluid, right? The cerebrospinal fluid, which is going to be a shock absorber, and it's going to protect the brain from any time of trauma and all. Okay, and this cranium, it is attached to the body by means of your cervical spine. So any injury to it can involve either the scalp, that is over the covering over the cranium, or it can involve the skull, or it can involve the brain. Okay, or it can be independently, separately, or it can be in combination. So majority of them, what will happen is it can either be in deceleration injury or acceleration injury. Acceleration injuries, brain is at rest. Somebody has hit the brain, and the brain has come into motion. This is what is acceleration injury. Brain is at rest. That is, the body is at the, for now. For example, right now I'm sitting. Right, somebody comes and hits me. It's an acceleration injury. Somebody is hitting the brain and bringing my brain to into acceleration, my cranium into acceleration. Okay, and the other is what is deceleration injury. That is, I am running and I come and hit something else. That is deceleration injury. Or I'm in a moving car, and I go and hit some ball. So suddenly my speed is decelerating. So this is what is deceleration injury. So majority of them, it is because of accelerating or decelerating injury, right? And now we have two things called coup and counter coup. Coup injuries, once the brain comes and hits at the point of impact, that is what is coup injury, right? Now, once it comes and hits the brain at the point of contact, is what is coup. Counter coup is the brain will come into motion and will hit the other opposite side of the skull, resulting in counter coup injury. Is it clear? Is it clear for you? Deceleration and acceleration injury, coup and counter coup. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. Once again, I'm just saying up acceleration injury. Brain is at rest. For example, I'm sitting here. Somebody comes and hits me, push my cranium into acceleration. That is acceleration injury. Okay. Deceleration, I am running, I come and hit a wall. That is deceleration injury. Okay. I'm in a moving car, I hit something, it is a deceleration injury. Okay. Other is what is coup and counter coup. Coup is where it comes and hits at a point of contact, that is coup injury. Counter coup is the brain is moving and it comes and hits the opposite cranium, opposite side of the skull ball. That is what is counter coup. Okay. So that's what I explained. The abrupt deceleration of moving head. The head is moving up. It comes to and suddenly it gets hit. At the point of impact, you have coup injury. Okay, and that can be all different types of injury. Counter coup injuries opposite to the point of impact. That is, it has come into impact. Once it has come into impact, you will have an injury at that point. But the brain will be still be moving in that fluid, and it will come and hit the other side of the cranium, opposite cranium, resulting in counter croup injury. Okay. So contusions can occur all along the undersurface of frontal lobe. Contusion, that is formation of clots or hematomas, they can occur up under the surface of frontal lobes or the tips of temporal lobes or beneath the fox or in the brainstem. So these contusions, they are typically multiple and they can also be bilateral. Okay. So it can be, as I told, it can either be because of abrupt acceleration or deceleration injury. Okay. Most of the force is absorbed by the skull. What is going to happen? Majority, when you hit up, first force to come in and contact is what is the skull or the cranium it's going to protect. Second thing that helps in protection of the brain is what is the cerebrospinal fluid. And after that, it hits and impacts the brain itself. Okay. So different mechanism of injury. So the cerebrospinal fluid and the skull, that is the cranium, they're all going to protect the brain. Okay. So in any rapid acceleration or a deceleration of focal forces will injure the brain, as I already told you. Coup injury at the site of impact. Wherever there is going to be impact to the skull, there you're going to have coup injury. Counter coup injury opposite to the site of impact. Okay. Hope I'm clear to you. Hmm? Scalp, right? So some lacerations, for example, a knife with a knife or with a hammer, somebody hits on my skull and all. My scalp will go for laceration, right? And this will give rise to exsanguinating hemorrhages, right? You already know that there is presence of large number of blood vessels in the loose areolar connective tissue of the scalp, right? And which get retracted. These blood vessels falling in laceration, they get retracted and they bleed extensively, resulting in uncontrollable hemorrhage. Okay. Although scalp lacerations or bruising confirm the presence of head injury, their absence does not exclude any underlying intracranial hematoma. Okay. Sometimes they will not be presence of a laceration may include that there may be some head injury, but absence of them will not exclude an intracranial hematoma. Okay. They may also have an still intracranial hematoma. They may be present. Okay. Blunt injury may be there. So outside scalp is normal, but inside it may get injured. Okay. So in soft fluctuant centers of the scalp, hematomas can masquerade and a depressed skull fracture in infants. Right. So in infants and all, they're going to have a cranium, and this cranium is malleable. It's not calcified cranium. It's not thickened and all. It's malleable. It is indentable. So once you do up, they will have a depressed fracture. Okay, that is indentable fracture. Scalp hair plays a protective role. Yeah, as you know, the hairs play a protective role. In infants, blood loss into the scalp can often be underestimated, leading to unexpected hypovolemic shock. In infants and all, the cranium or the scalp is one which is going to have the maximum amount of area surface for them, and any injury will result in an hemorrhage which may be unnoticed, resulting in hypovolemic shock. Okay, so scalp lacerations, they should be repaired in two layers. So you are going to approximate the cilia aponeurotica, and then you are going to close the superficial layer of the skin. Okay, abscess and hematoma in the pericardium, they're limited to area of the one bone. See, this all the pericardium or the scalp, it is fixed lower down to the that particular area of the bone. Okay, so once there is going to be an hematoma and all, it gets confined to that particular region. Okay, later on, once there is going to be infection of this, it can result in osteomyelitis of the cranium with the edema of the scalp, that is referred to as Pott's puffy tumor. Okay, so this Pott's puffy tumor is actually a misnomer. It is not a tumor. Okay, Pott's puffy tumor is not a tumor. It's a misnomer that has been, this term has been given to osteomyelitis of the skull. The skull bone, it goes for osteomyelitis. That is because of being associated with subperiosteal swelling. That is because of the subperiosteal swelling and edema of the scalp, and it is referred to as Pott's puffy tumor. Okay. Skull. So different types of skull injuries can follow following a blunt trauma. Okay. So what can happen? They can be simple linear fractures of the skull. Okay. So they don't require any neurological management immediately. Okay. Following some blunt trauma, it can result in small cracks within the skull bone. Okay. Because of considerable distortion in the skull and all. So what do you do once the patient comes to you with an head injury and all? You're going to, any patient of head injury, even though patient has sustained a small linear fractures, you're going to admit the patient and observe the patient for a period of at least 48 hours. You're going to observe it. Because what will happen? Initially, following a trauma, they may be just minor skull fractures, that may be seen on CT scan, but inside brain it may be normal. Okay, inside brain it is normal, but outside only there is going to be some the fractures of the skull and all. But this patient may deteriorate later on. Initially, it may be normal because there may be small bleed inside which may go unnoticed. And after a period of some time, maybe some 6 hours or something, once the once the blood goes on increasing within the cranium, what will happen? Intracranial pressure will increase. Now the patient will start having symptoms of it. So any patient with an history of skull fracture or head injury, he should be admitted and observed for a period of at least 48 hours. Okay. So depressed skull fractures. So these fractures they are as a result of sharper trauma. Okay, there's some sharp trauma at the front. Majority of the time, you can see that some kids and all will have some depression over the frontal bone. Okay, following some trauma and all, what will happen? There's going to be a depressed fracture, and as you already know, there's going to be two tables: an outer table of the skull, inner table of the skull. So outer table of the skull, it gets affected and it's pushed inside. Okay, and till the dura, pericranium, all they are fine, it is fine. Once the dura is ruptured and all, then the patient will have a lot of other signs, either signs of dural irritation like epilepsy, or if there is going to be hemorrhage and hematoma, patient will have all signs of increased intracranial pressure. Hmm? Okay, and in depressed skull fracture, obviously there is also an increased risk of intracranial infection. Okay, so all those wounds with the contaminated wounds, they need to be extensively, you need to debride it off. Duroplasty, all needs to be done. So any depressed skull fractures, what are we going to see? You're going to admit the patient, okay? And you're going to observe the patient for a period of at least 48 hours. There's just a depressed fracture of the skull. The dura inside is normal. There is no hemorrhage. Patient may not have anything. You can just observe the patient. If there's a depressed skull fracture along with some trauma, I mean, the dura is ruptured and all, you may need to do duroplasty. If there's an hematoma, which will result in extradural hematoma or subdural hematoma, it needs to be evacuated under general anesthesia. Okay. So, risk of any post-traumatic epilepsy following a depressed skull fracture and cortical laceration is approximately about 15%. Okay. Now, this base of skull fractures. So the base of the skull fractures, it can either be anterior fossa, middle cranial fossa, or posterior cranial fossa. These all fossas or the bases it can get fractured. So what will happen once there is going to be fracture? What will happen? The CSF is going to leak from it. Okay, and the CSF fistula may be there, and the patient will say that I'm just passing in watery discharge from the nose. That is, following an anterior cranial fossa fracture, there can be a leak of CSF. Okay, after a few days. So this anterior fossa fracture, it may also involve the frontal or ethmoidal air sinuses, or it may run across the cribriform plate. Okay, so whenever there is and these all, what will happen? For example, there is a trauma to the anterior cranial fossa, patient will have bilateral ecchymosis. They can be two lines, that is both bilateral periorbital edema and as well as hematoma is going to be seen. Periorbital hemorrhages. That is one. Second thing, posterior limits of sclera. Sclera, patient may have anosmia. There's going to be absence of smell. There's going to be bleeding from the anterior, from the nose in anterior cranial fossa fractures. There can be CSF rhinorrhea. From the nose, you will be just passing up the CSF. Okay. Sometimes patient can also have corticocavernous fistula. The fistula between carotid and cavernous artery. Okay. Periorbital hematoma that is called as raccoon eyes. Whereas in middle cranial fossa is the one which is going to involve the petrous part of the temporal bone. So what will here patient will have? Patient will have CSF otorrhea. That is, from his ear there is passage of CSF leaks out. Patient may have hemotympanum. That is, the eardrum, just behind the eardrum you can see a blood. Ossicular disruption. Battle sign. Battle sign is there is going to be development of ecchymosis over the mastoid region. That is battle sign. Or palsies involving seventh and eighth cranial nerve. Okay, the facial nerve or auditory will go. Okay, the fractures that may be visible on the plane. Sometimes on the plane CT, plane X-ray it may be visible, but majority of the time we take a CT scan, and on a CT scan they are much more visible. You identify the fractures and all. Okay, so this is one. Here the patient is going to have corticocavernous fistula. Just see that here there is a what the eye orbit. There's bilateral ecchymosis they can have. Okay, corticocavernous fistula. There's a fistula behind. Here you can make out raccoon eyes. Okay, bilaterally on both sides there is periorbital ecchymosis that is called as raccoon eyes. This is what is Battle sign. Hmm? Battle sign, that is in middle cranial fossa fracture over the region of the mastoid, the postauricular region, there is presence of ecchymosis. Hmm? Petrous part of temporal bone, that is going to be middle cranial fossa fracture. Okay, so see, antibiotics in the previous era, antibiotics, even though they say that antibiotics has to be started, but majority of them, or what book says, that antibiotics should not be started unless there is some infection, or unless you are planning to go for some intervention. Okay, one other thing that you can do is, if there is just leakage of the water mixed with the blood, and you're suspecting that the patient is going to have CSF leak, what you can do is beta transferrin. There is a protein called as beta transferrin that is exclusively present or very excessively high in case of CSF. So you can measure this beta transferrin, and you can confirm that the the fluid that is coming mixed with the blood is CSF only. Okay. Persistent CSF fistula, patients presenting with meningitis, they should undergo an investigation to identify the fistula and repair. Okay. If there's a persistent CSF fistula, leakage of all the fluid and all, patient can develop can have meningitis. So if it is so, we need to find out what is the site of that fistula and repair that fistula. Okay. So the patient should not have any hydrocephalus. So what you can do is, you can place the dura which is ruptured. You can do a duroplasty. That is, the dura can be repaired by a vascular graft or fibrin glue. Okay. So brain injury. So brain injury, you can again classify into primary brain injury, secondary brain injury. Okay. The primary brain injuries, you have been hit by something, the patient has contusion, patient has laceration, patient has some hematoma and all, that is what is primary brain injury. Okay. Secondary brain injury is because of hypoxia, hypovolemia, or because of decreased oxygen. So what is going to happen in secondary brain injury? Following a primary brain injury, there is a collection of blood, right? In the cranium, there is going to be collection of blood, and this collection of blood and all is going to increase intracranial pressure. Once the intracranial pressure increases, the blood supply to the brain is tries to be compensated, but as it increases further and further, that compensation is not possible. And once compensation is not possible, the blood supply decreases, resulting in hypoxia. One. Second thing is hypotension. Hypertension, decreased blood supply, there's going to be injury to the neurovascular system, resulting in secondary brain injury. Okay. So primary is at the site of impact, at the time of impact. Secondary brain injury is progressive brain damage that may follow later on. Okay. So primary brain injury, what is this? What is diffuse axonal head injury? So diffuse axonal head injury, it is very severe form of head injury. Okay. So this may diffuse axonal injury. See, you can again have two varieties of it. One is what is called concussion, and other is diffuse axonal injury. True. So a true diffuse axonal injury, what is going to happen between the gray matter and the white matter? The axons which are there, they're completely disrupted. They're completely gone off. Okay. Once the axons are completely disrupted and gone off, the patient is now in vegetative state. That is, he's almost dead only. So here, because of disruption of the axons on myelin and blood capillaries, so it will result in diffuse axonal injury. The severity of this can range, it can vary up, but majority of the time it will result in coma and death of the patient only. And what you can see is, you can make out petechial hemorrhages between the gray matter and the white matter. You can make out petechial hemorrhages that are characteristic for diffuse axonal injury. Okay. So types of primary brain injury, it can be either be diffuse axonal injury, that is between the gray matter and white matter, the whole of the axons are completely torn off. That is what is primary brain injury. The second is concussion. Concussion, it is in temporary form of injury wherein following a trauma, what is going to happen? Patient will have amnesia. For some time, patient will not be able to remember anything and all. That is what is concussion. And again, he will get back to normal. Okay. Okay. Cerebral concussion. Then other is cerebral contusion, laceration. Okay. So here you can make out, right? So a CT scan showing diffuse axonal injury. There are multiple bleeds are there. Multiple subarachnoid bleeds are there in between the gray and the white matter. This is what is diffuse axonal injury. Cerebral concussion, it is a simple form of injury. It is a temporary injury. Therein, there's a temporary loss of function. So immediately following the injury, the patient is unable to remember. After some time, again he comes back to normal. Some abnormalities that may accompany along with it is include bradycardia, hypertension, and sweating. Okay, amnesia. That is, he will not be able to remember what has happened and the events. That is very common with concussion. Okay, so the concussion is very is minor form of injury, and whereas that of diffuse axonal injury is one of the very severe form of injury, wherein the patient is going to be in the vegetative state, in coma and death. And there's something called post-concussion syndrome. It is a complex of symptoms persisting for months and all. That is, the patient is going to have headache, irritability, depression. Patient will have vertigo and lassitude. Okay, that is tired feeling and all. Who return to work. So what do you usually say? Many patients and all, you advise those patient who has sustained concussion to have bed rest. If they don't take proper bed rest and all for some time and all, they get back to work early and all, they can have this post concussion syndrome with headache, irritability, depression, vertigo, and lassitude. Okay, cerebral contusion, laceration. Right, following a trauma, they can be hematoma or they can be laceration of the skull that is visible on a CT scan. Okay, the patient will have focal neurological deficit that will persist for longer than 24 hours. So this all things that is contusion, laceration, they can occur even without skull fracture. The skull outside may be normal, but inside the brain would have damaged up because of coup and counter coup. Okay, some the pia and arachnoid matter, it can be they can turn off and resulting in intracerebral hemorrhage or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, complications of head injury. What all? Primary brain injuries. What all we have is concussion, contusions, lacerations, diffuse axonal injury. Okay, brain contusions and all. Whereas secondary brain injuries are intracranial hematomas. They can be cerebral edema. They can be in hypoxia, infection. Secondaries, that is, they all develop later on. Edema develops later on. Hypoxia will develop later on. Okay, ischemia, because of the increased pressure, intracranial pressure, the blood supply is decreased, resulting in ischemia. And later on, they can be getting infection, or epilepsy. Okay, or metabolic and endocrine disturbances. All these can occur. These are all secondary brain injuries. Okay. So secondary brain injuries, you can have intracranial hematomas. So these appear as an hyperdense lesion on the CT scan. So disrupted cerebral tissue that is going to release thromboplasins that potentiate hemorrhage. So what is basically going to happen is, see, there's a damage to the brain. The cerebral tissue releases, in order to prevent the clotting and all, they release some thromboplastins, which may in turn result in hemorrhage, small internal hemorrhages in the brain, small blood clots within the brain, which can further damage the brain. So it can either be an acute hematoma or a chronic hematoma. Okay. And what do we have is what is called swell sign. The swell sign is nothing but the blood clots which are there in the brain. They can be sometimes fresh and sometimes they can be chronic blood clots. So this mixed blood clots are what is called swell sign. Okay. Large intracerebral hematomas, they should be evacuated. Any intracellular hematomas which are there large, they need to be evacuated because they will result in compression of the brain. That will result in increased intracranial pressure. That will result in hypoxia to the brain, ischemia to the brain. So they need to be evacuated as early as possible. So this intracranial hematomas, they can again be intracerebral. That is within the brain you have hematomas. And these are visible on CT. Another is extradural. That is outside the dura mater. That is between the skull and the dura mater you have a hematoma. That is what is extradural hematoma. So surgery has to be done without a delay in this extradural hematoma. Subdural hematoma, it is present just beneath the dura mater. Again, subacute or chronic. Chronic subdural hematoma present for a long period of time. That is, some elderly person will be there. He would have fallen into the bathroom, and afterwards he would have been doing fine. But as you examine after some time and all, the patient will be slowly deteriorating. Patient will be having amnesia. Patient will be having some other symptoms after a long period of time. That is what is chronic subdural hematoma. Okay, extradural hematoma. Any linear squamous temporal fold fracture or laceration of the middle meningeal artery. Once there is a middle meningeal artery ruptures and all, they may result in EDH. That is collection of blood between the dura mater and the cranium. Hmm? So this potential space is filled with an hematoma that goes on expanding. So what initially happens is, because since there is going to be increase in the hematoma, blood and all, it is going to compress the brain. So initially the brain and the cranium, it tries to, and there will be increase in intracranial pressure, right? Now the brain tries to prevent this increased intracranial pressure by shifting the fluid from the cranium. It is going to shift the fluid into the spinal canal, right? It goes on shifting the fluid into the spinal canal, the CSF into the spinal canal, and compensates for increased hematoma. But after some period of time, it will be beyond the capacity for the brain to compensate. At that time, what will happen? With a further increase in hematoma size, now the pressure will suddenly increase, and the patient will have all those signs of brain injury, like lethargic, he'll be unconscious, the patient will have vomiting, patient will have what the pupils will get dilated or anisocoria, they will have all those signs and symptoms. Okay, so EDH. So can you see here? So there's a picture of CT scan wherein there's a collection of blood in the extradural space, and this lesion is what is biconvex. It is biconvex lesion, like this, right? So extradural hematoma therefore accounts for two-thirds. So majority of the intracranial hematomas are extradural hematoma. Without a delay, you try to manage this with surgical emergency. It is surgical emergency. Go evacuate the clot. Patient will be doing very good. Okay. So here there is a craniotomy. It's the skull has been opened up. The skull has been opened up, and you can see a clot. So here there is a presence of a clot, and that clot has been or is being evacuated. Okay. So EDS. So majority of the patients with the EDS, they usually do well when managed as an emergency. Whereas in a subdural hematoma, already there is going to be a damage to the brain, and there's going to be collection of blood in the subdural space. Okay, in the subdural space, what is going to happen? The prognosis with the subdural hematoma or hemorrhage is poor. With EDH, it is good. Okay, subdural hematomas. So most common, it may occur following an intracranial mass lesion resulting from head trauma. Okay, they can classify into acute, subacute, and chronic. Acute is occurring within less than 3 days. Subacute 4 to 12 days. Chronic subdural hematoma, one which occurs more than 21 days. So less than 3 days, 4 to 12 days, and more than 21 days. Okay. Subacute subdural hematomas. So what is going to happen in the subacute? Most of them will result from torn bridging veins or focal tears of cortical artery. Hmm? They may vary up, okay? And burst temporal lobe. Burst temporal lobe is a term sometimes used to describe appearance of contusional intracerebral hematoma. Hmm? They use this term. So basically, what do you need to remember in subacute and this one in subacute and extradural hematoma and subdural hematoma is EDH has a good prognosis. Here it is SDH has a that is subacute subdural hematoma has a poor prognosis. EDH, there is going to be collection of blood between the cranium and the dura, whereas subdural, it is going to be collection of blood beneath the dura mater. Okay. Chronic, here the patient uh, is going to present for a period more than 21 days. Commonly seen in elderly 60 years, following a minor trauma, they may develop small bleeds and they manifest after 3 weeks. What will happen is initially blood clot is there, later on lot of water, everything will accumulate and all, and it will increase in size, the blood clot, and now it will start compressing, and then the patient will develop symptoms. That is over 3 weeks and all. So the membranes that are derived from the dura arachnoid matter then encapsulate the hematoma, which remains clotted for 2 to 3 weeks, and then it qualifies and liquefies up. Okay, so you can make a burr hole in the cranium and you can evacuate that. Okay, so this is what is an subdural hematoma. Can you make out here? There's a subdural hematoma, collection of blood. Hmm? It's not that it will be concave or convex. It's like it will be more of a concave, like concave shape. Whereas when you see the EDH, it is more of biconvex, right? So here also. Hmm? So here you can make out two things. One is the one which is very black in color. Hmm? Is what is the acute subdural hematoma. and where it is bit of decreased radiolucency and all is what is chronic subdural hematoma. So it is an acute and chronic subdural hematoma. Okay. So you have something called cerebral swelling. Any falling, any trauma to the head and all, there's going to be any intracerebral hematoma or contusion, falling contusion and all. Obviously, the brain is going to swell up. Okay. And patient may also have multiple cerebral contusions or petechial hemorrhages will be there that will contribute to brain swelling. Okay. So once the intracranial pressure increases, the patient will have loss of consciousness and other things. Cerebral swelling. It can be local, that is around the hematoma, or it can be diffuse swelling. Will result in increased intracranial pressure that will cause number of symptoms like vomiting, loss of consciousness, and so on. Okay. More common and more dangerous in children. Secondary side effects, you can have infection, hydrocephalus, seizures, systemia, infection. See, infection, what is going to happen? There's already a breach in the skull, right? So from outside, the infection go and reach the intracranium. One, hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus, what is going to happen? Following a trauma or head injury and all, blood is there. This blood is going to go and block the different outflow system of CSF, that is foramen of Monroe or the Magna, Lusca, all these foramen, they can get blocked by the blood. And once they are blocked by the blood and all, it will result in hydrocephalus, seizures because of increased intracranial pressure. Ischemia, decreased blood supply to the brain because of increased intracranial pressure again. Cerebral ischemia, this is common after severe headache, after severe head trauma and all, it's common. So brain has lost its regulation and therefore resulting in ischemia. Herniation, okay. Once there is going to be increase in pressure within the cranium, what is going to happen? Now the brain will herniate down through the foramen magnum into the spinal canal. Okay. So there are different types of herniation. One is transtentorial herniation. That is, over the tentorium, it can go beneath it. Okay. Subphalangeal herniation. In the center, you have falx cerebri, right? And this beneath it, it can go down. That is what is subphalangeal herniation. And then you have foramen magnum. The brainstem may herniate down through the foramen magnum into the spinal canal. So transcranial herniation, it occurs with downward displacement of the brain and herniation, the uncus and the middle part of temporal lobe of the sharp edge of tentorial limb. What is a tentorial herniation? When the brainstem it goes down beneath the foramen magnum, it is herniation through the foramen magnum. Okay. So what is going to happen is the reticular activating system of the brainstem is going to be compressed. So consciousness, hypertension, coma, patient will have Stokes respiration. Okay, the make compression of any ipsilateral corticospinal tracts. Hmm? Patient will have contralateral hemiparesis. Okay, so these are different types. Okay, so this is a normal intracranial resist. Okay, right. Can you see here? Cursor is not. So in the B you can see, right? So B is what is the subphalangeal herniation in the B. So in the B, what happens beneath the falx cerebri, this is going to go down, okay, resulting in subphalangeal herniation, okay. And the C again, there's going to be herniation the uncus, so transtentorial. Whereas the D here, there's going to be brainstem, which is going to herniate down through the foramen magnum into the spinal canal. That is through the foramen magnum, okay. So this all because of the increased pressure in the posterior fossa, resulting in herniation in the cerebellar tonsils, which get compressed. Patient will have neck rigidity and all those things. Hmm? Foramen magnum and coning. So, so multiple durate hemorrhages will be seen. What will happen with the durate hemorrhages is, as a result of damage to the brain, the shearing stress and all, multiple hemorrhages are seen within the brainstem, which are called as durate hemorrhages. Sometimes there can be a traction damage to the pituitary stalk, resulting in diabetes insipidus, right? So the ADH, antidiuretic hormone, which has to be secreted, is not being secreted by the pituitary as a result of damage, and that is going to result in diabetes insipidus, right? And with the progressive herniation, what can happen? The pupils on one side they become mid-sized. They can be unreactive. They can become dilated up. Okay. The patient can have large number of electrolyte disturbances following any trauma, okay, and head injury. Management. So management, once the patient comes to you with a head injury, you have to always assess the patient what neurological injury he has. Okay, what is his neurological system? That is, you're going to do with the Glasgow Coma Scale. That is, you're going to see the eye response, you're going to see the verbal response, and the motor response, right? And the normal Glasgow Coma Scale is 15 by 15, and the minimum is going to be 3 by 15. 3 by 15 is coma or dead. Okay, so you're going to assess his neurological state as one. Second thing, you have to see his other injuries. The other injuries may be life threatening. Something, maybe there may be some trauma to the thorax and there's collection of blood and all. Okay. So here it is much more, it may cause a lot of problem rather than something else. One. Other, there is some trauma to the abdomen with the collection of blood, hemoperitoneum. So you have to assess that, and that has to be taken care of. To assess the ATLS, and always go for ABCDS, life support with ATLS guidelines, and then ABCDE all. See his airway, see his breathing, see his circulation, pulse, all those, disability and exposed. Okay. Always given attention to the airway, securing and blood pressure first, and take an early CT scan to find out what injury it is and where it is after stabilizing the patient. Skull radiography was taken previously, but now with the advent of CT being available easily, it is CT scans are taken much more commonly. Okay, CT brain scan. So when is to be performed? If the patient is doing fine initially, any neurological signs patient has, any evidence of basal skull fracture, that is raccoon eyes or battle sign, or the patient is deteriorating, becoming drowsy, or there's going to be increased ventilation, all these are signs that we need to go for again a repeat CT. Okay. And the assessment of head injury points to determine the history are loss of consciousness. The patient comes to you with and gives that he was unconscious for some time. It is an indication to perform a CT scan. Patient gives an history of loss of uh, he is unable to remember. There is an amnesia. Go for a CT scan. Okay. Cause, circumstance, and mechanism of injury. Any headache is there, headache and vomiting and seizures. You have to go for. Okay. So minimizing the brain damage. What? How can you minimize the brain damage? You can not minimize the primary brain damage. You can't do. What you can do is you can minimize the secondary brain damage. Secondary brain damage is because of hypoxia. It is because of ischemia, right? So what you can do here, you can perfuse properly. You can give proper. If blood is lost, put the blood. Or when there's going to be decreased hypertension, you have to infuse fluids. Decrease oxygen, you have to oxygenate properly. Okay. So this is the same herniation and other. Okay. So patient should be monitored in intravenous and in ICU care. Patient should be properly ventilated, and you have to see the pupil response, the responses of limb, verbal, and motor response to be checked repeatedly. Central line has to be placed. You have to monitor the urinary catheter, and catheter output should be there. Okay, properly. Intracranial pressure has to be monitored, and it should be not be increased, maintained to about 25 millimeters of mercury below. Cerebral perfusion pressure should be normal. It should be maintained normal for proper perfusion. Okay, and patient should be given proper analgesia with fentanyl, or if the patient is very irritated, he need to be sedated with propofol or midazolam. Okay. So ventilation, maintain a proper ventilation. Okay. PCO2 levels of this one and all. Monitor hemodynamics. Head up position. Okay. Give analgesia and sedation. Intracranial pressure should be less than 25 millimeters of mercury, and cerebral perfusion pressure should be more than 70 millimeters of mercury. Perfusion to the brain should be good, and pressure within the brain, intracranial pressure should be less. Right. Temperature, pyrexia. The pyrexia fever should be brought down by administration by giving paracetamol. CT scan to be repeated as early and often. Okay. Something that should be possible or things that to be avoided during our first 5% dextrose. Hyperglycemia to the brain is also damageable. Okay. So hyperglycemia should not be done by administering 5% dextrose. One. Dexamethasone. So dexamethasone, previously they were using corticosteroid in order to prevent the brain injury, but now it has been found that this dexamethasone does not have any benefit. Okay, it has been stopped. Mannitol, in order to decrease the intracranial pressure, you can give mannitol. One. You can give diuretics, furosemide. Okay. Although the mannitol reduces the normal brain volume, it can reach on all into the area of condition, increasing mass. Some effects are there. One, raised intracranial pressure that cannot be controlled by these means alone. Then you need to go for ventriculostomy. Open the ventricle, drain off all the fluid, CSF drains, frontal and temporal decompression is to be done and all. Hypothermia, down to 34 degrees Celsius, thought to reduce the cerebral metabolism and ICP, but we don't do hypothermia nowadays. Pyrexia, yes. Pyrexia, patient has pyrexia, it is again going to damage the brain. Some decrease of pyrexia by administering paracetamol. But you need to, whenever the patient is very, very high, having high grade fevers and all, always rule out infection. Okay. So any head injury, if it is a closed head injury, we don't need to have antibiotics. Open head injury, we give antibiotics. Okay. Temperature by control by tepid sponging or paracetamol. Routine care of the unconscious patient. Repeat the CT scan whenever there is going to be deterioration. Patient deteriorates. There's increased ventilation. Pupils are dilating. Or the patient is having fever, high grade fever and all. Suspect and always go for a repeat CT scan. We have other new monitoring modalities have come up, like intracellular microdialysis and all those, which we don't follow. Okay. Other we have is non-accidental head injuries. So these are very rare. That is non-accidental. So more commonly, most frequently, it may birth trauma. One, or sometimes in the infant, the child might have sustained some trauma, and it goes unnoticed. And after some times, 2 3 months and all, you suspect that the child is doing some abnormal behavior, and you get a CT done, and patient will have chronic subdural hematoma. Okay, or the child may be in a child abuse with the battered children, batter baby syndrome. Okay, missile injuries. Okay, although see with the missile injuries and all, not ask for you. What you need to remember with the missile injuries, they are going always going to cause a shock wave. It is because you use a gun, you're shooting up. Majority of these individuals, they don't present to you because they are dead at the spot only. Okay, they cause very extensive brain laceration. There's an extensive brain trauma. They cause a cavitation and all, resulting in hematoma, hemorrhage, and patient dies up on spot. Okay, so this is not for you. Delayed effects. What all delayed effects patient can have? Post-trauma epilepsy. Patient can have epilepsy following a trauma. One, patient may have cerebrospinal fluid fistula. There will be complete leakage of fluid. Okay, patient will have post-concussion symptoms in the form of headache, irritability, loss of consciousness, and all those things. Patient will have other neuroendocrine abnormalities. Whenever there is going to be damage to pituitary, patient will have diabetes insipidus, right? Because of decreased secretion of antidiuretic hormone. Patient will have other electrolyte imbalances. Okay. So this finishes off. Do you have anything to ask to me? You can ask up. Out of EDH and SDH, which has good prognosis? Extradural
ED,
hematoma has good prognosis or
EDH.
SDH? EDH. Why? Why EDH has a better prognosis? Or why SDH has a poor prognosis? Why SDH will have a poor prognosis? See, majority of the time, SDH is collection of blood beneath the dura mater, right? Beneath the dura mater, there is a collection of blood beneath, inside, right? So when there's a collection of blood beneath or inside, what is going to happen? There's always some form of injury that has occurred to the brain. There were small lacerations, or there were small contusions within the brain, or small petechial hemorrhages over the brain and all. Okay, already the brain is damaged. So patient will have some or the other form of neurological disability or debility later on. Whereas in EDH, what will happen? It's just collection of blood outside the dura. So you remove off, prognosis is going to be good with EDH. Okay. So this is what. Hmm. What are three things that you see in Glasgow Coma Scale? Glasgow Coma Scale, you see three things. What do you see? What do you see? Eye opening. How is he opening the eye? Okay. Opens the eye spontaneously. Okay, it's given different scales are there, different numbering things being done. Opens the eye. Eye opening, verbal response, motor response. Okay. Eye opening, he just opens the eyes spontaneously by himself. Okay. One. Verbal response, that is, he's oriented. You ask him, where are you? He says, I'm in the hospital. Who are you? Who am I? He says, you are a doctor. He's all oriented. He is oriented to all time, place, and person. Okay. Command, you ask him to raise his hand or something, he raises up. Okay. So he's obeying all his commands. So it's eye opening, verbal response, motor response. Okay. Do you have any doubts? You can ask me. If not, I'm finishing up. Is it clear for you? Yes or no? Don't worry, again in the fourth year, you will have again one more brief on this one. This is just a small part of head injury only. Okay. Anything else you have?